before we get into the questions and answers, I'm going to turn it over to Ed. He's going to talk a bit more about Matthew chapter 13, and then he's going to talk about who the woman is, and then we'll go into some questions. And I'd encourage you guys in the meantime, if you have questions, if you would just write the questions and pass them like to the aisle, and then pass them up, and then somebody in the aisle can bring them to me, and we'll cover the questions as we're able. We're probably not going to answer any questions like, who do we think the Easter Bunny is? So.
Oh, I know the answer. I cover it, but anyways, go on.
That's what I was afraid of. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Ed.
Okay, so this morning, just a very quick review. I wanted to map out what was happening, the church, and we're in kind of a mess today, generally speaking. And the reason why is because we're in the great apostasy, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Now, if we look carefully, we looked at the Gospel of Matthew, and we kind of traced the line there where it's given a special thought. It's showing the king, he's presenting himself as the Mashiach Nagi, the Messiah, the king. All right? It gives all the credentials, and we see the rejection in chapter 10, or actually chapter 11 by the cities. In chapter 12, we get to the blasphemy of the spirits where the leaders reject him. And then the kingdom takes a mystery form, okay? Because what were they expecting? I'll just ask people. What were they expecting? Did Jesus come here? Was the obvious thing for him to come here to present the church, give the church? Be careful. When I go like this, my Tuesday night group knows that I'm baiting them, okay? Was he here to present the church? No. What was he here to present to Israel? The kingdom. Yes, the Messianic kingdom, millennial kingdom. And that, now obviously God knew they were going to reject him, and then that the church was going to come back. So now he starts talking about the mystery form of the kingdom, okay? And we go into the first parable. There's 7 parables there, all right? And 7 is a number of perfection, fullness, completion, right? I mean, perfection isn't complete because Satan has 7 heads in Revelation 13, right? Okay, so as we go through that, the first one is the sower and the seeds, and you have 4 different results. That's evangelism. That's how the church starts, all right? Then you go to the next one, is the parable, the wheat and the tares, all right? So what happens? Well, the congregation or the assembly is the wheat. Then the enemy comes, and who do you think the enemy is? Satan. He comes and he sows tares in there. All of a sudden the assembly gets bloated. It's too big. Then you have people pretending to be Christians in there, okay? And some of them actually think they are, I believe. Now you have the bloated assembly. Then you get to the next one. It's the parable of the mustard seed. And it says, now get this, I love this. I ran across this years ago in a commentary. It says it grows, it's a bush, it's a tree that grows big enough for the birds of the air to come and nest in its branches. Well, we already know from the first parable, he tells us what the birds of the air are in Mark 4. Messengers of Satan. It's Satan. So when the birds come and nest in the trees, we usually make this nice, cute little parable. Oh, look, the world comes, it finds shade and comfort. That's not what it is. If you were Jewish at the time, the birds of the air, all throughout the scriptures, they're bad. They're evil. Okay? So they come and nest in the branches. And also there's another thing here. Because of the previous parable, the assembly's too big and bloated. A mustard seed only grows into a bush, a low-lying bush. How many times have you guys seen a nest, a bird's nest in a bush? You don't. It has to be high up, right? You know what that speaks of? It speaks of unnatural growth because of the previous parable, right? And when you have your cells in your body that start multiplying and get out of hand, what's that called? Cancer. It's cancerous growth. Now, because of that, the birds of the air are specifically the leaders. So now you got a false congregation, not all of it. You got false leaders that are in there. And then that's where we build up is to the last, or the fourth parable, okay? Which is the woman and the leaven, which I know that Tom has already told me that you guys already know what leaven is. It's two things. Jesus said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. False teaching. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, he talks about the leaven of malice and wickedness. That's false living. It actually matters what you believe. False teaching leads to false living, okay? And that's what happens when the leaders get in. Now, that's where I had the audacity, and I've never heard anybody say this. I'm going to identify the woman in Matthew 13:33. The woman who takes the leaven and she hides it inside of the dough. Now, you must think, you're crazy. How can you identify the woman? I think you can. What is leaven? Now, I'm going to bait you here. What's leaven? No, I mean, what's it literally? It's yeast, right? Incorrect. Okay. You guys fell for it. It is something that's fermented, something that already has the yeast in it. It's a starter dough. So you didn't have to have the actual yeast. You get like the dough, part of the dough from another lump. And then you put it into that lump. And then, you know, when you're almost done with that lump, you put it into the next lump. So that's important. It's not, it's something from another lump of bread. So as we go in there, we find the woman that she's hiding it. She hides it in there. She doesn't just put it in there. She's doing secretly, which is kind of like, what's going on there? Okay, let's see here. So leaven is a starter dough from a previous, and you see that, and in there it says she took 3 measures of meal to create that dough. Why 3? Well, do you know that the church is broken up into 3 parts? It's Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Protestantism. 3. Okay. And also, from Genesis 18:6, that was the fellowship offering, where Sarah, when the 2 angels and God appeared, she was told to take 3 measures of meal. So in the Jewish world and in the Arab world, that's still the fellowship offering. So if you're a Jew during that time and you heard that, you would say, you're putting leaven in the fellowship offering? That's a bad thing. That's not good, okay? And so we have to understand it from the context of the culture of that. So let's go now to Leviticus 23:17. You don't have to turn there. I'll tell you what it is. The whole key to this and what God showed me was everything is encoded and prophetic in the feast. Leviticus 23 has all the prophetic history. People ask me, why are you pre-trib? And everybody comes up with this verse or that verse. I say Leviticus 23, and boy, do I get blank stares when I say that. Actually, the pre-trib rapture is clearly proclaimed in Leviticus 23 because God says about the feast, he calls them his holy convocations. That's holy mikras. If you look under Strong's, it's holy rehearsals. They're rehearsing for something that's going to happen in the future. He calls them his ha-moedim, his moeds or moedims, which is just the plural, his appointed times. Look under Strong's, it calls it, that means signals, signs. So he says the feast are signals and signs of something to come. He says they're dress rehearsals, and they're prophetic. And if you go through 1 Corinthians, all through the book, he encodes that, and he didn't mean to. I think it was just God's hand. He encodes what I call the 1 Corinthian code, where he goes through, he names each feast in order. Now, this is very important. He starts off in 1 Corinthians 5:7, I believe. He says, clean out the old leaven. That's not even the feast. That's the ceremony before the feast. It's called Bedikat Chametz, where they're cleaning out the leaven. Then he says, so Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed. He just got through naming the first feast, which is Christ being crucified, okay? And then he goes through all of them, all the way up to 1 Corinthians 15, and I'm not going to say it right now because I got to get through this. Then he says, the rapture will happen at the last trumpet. And it drives me wild when people say, well, the 7th trumpet. Oh, no, there's a trumpet in Matthew when he returns. It's none of those. The last trumpet is a technical term, and it's connected to a feast. Okay? He says the rapture will happen on this feast, and guess what? He names off certain feasts, and he gets to that feast, and he says that's when the rapture is going to happen. If you know the Hebraic background. So we'll probably come back. Someone write down the question, what is that last trumpet? Okay? And I'll answer it then. In Leviticus 23:17, this is talking about the Feast of Pentecost. What do you think the Feast of Pentecost represents prophetically? Yes. If you go to Acts chapter 2, it says, when the Feast of Pentecost had fully come, or something translated like that, it could literally be translated when the Feast of Pentecost was being fulfilled. That's the word that he uses in the Greek. Okay, that's the word that Luke uses. And if you look at Acts chapter 2, what's that? The Spirit's giving and the church starts. It represents the church, right? So let's go to Leviticus 23 and see what it says and how it's prophetic. Here we go. Okay, you shall bring from your dwelling 2 loaves of bread of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. See, that should throw up red flags. It's like, there's a feast with leaven in it? That's kind of unusual, right? And in fact, a lot of people, to justify that leaven is good, they say, well, right here, there's a feast of God that has leaven in it, right? But what does that mean? 2 loaves, it represents the Jew and the Gentile. Dirty, rotten, low-down, scummy sinners that are full of leaven that are coming together, okay? Is that what it is? Ephesians 2, he broke down the dividing wall. So the leaven is not good in there. It's representing sin and bad stuff, but that God is going to renew, okay? And it also represents something else. Let's go back to the parable in Matthew 13:33. And this is I have to explain remnants and all that sometime. It also represents a previous loaf that contaminates the new loaf, the 2 loaves. The new loaf was Christianity. The previous loaf was the mystery Babylon religions that got into Christianity and permeated everything. It didn't say part of the loaf was leavened. The whole loaf gets leavened, which is actually, I kind of made, it was only a semi-joke. I know who the Easter Bunny is because I'm going to kind of trace it in a roundabout way. And we've been contaminated. We have a Babylonian way and system within the church. Remember tradition and all that? Paradosis adds up to 666, okay? So there's a lot going on in there in the woman with the loaves, okay? Now, we're going to get through. I'm going to do this quickly. We're going to trace a certain woman through Scripture, and we're going to end up in Matthew 13:33, and then we're going to go to Revelation 2, and then we're going to go to another place in Revelation where she ends up. Now, the Bible is a story of 3 women. Okay, you ready? It is the story of Israel. And she is the divorced wife of God the Father. You can't get your idioms mixed up. It drives me crazy when I go on these websites and they say, well, this is the marriage between God and his wife, in the church. No, God the Father married Israel. He gave her a certificate of divorce. And in fact, you write down Jeremiah 3:8. And interestingly enough, remember the great apostates coming? Well, you guys know what the Septuagint is? It's the Greek translation of the Old Testament. You know what that word for divorce is in the Septuagint? Apostasia. Yeah. Because it's a falling away. It's a breaking of a bond you don't break. So I know, when I first saw this, like, you're kidding me. But it's that in the Septuagint. And then what happens? What's the end of that? God restores Israel. He says in Hosea 2:14-16, he says, I will allure her and will bring her into the wilderness and speak comfort to her. So that's God's heart. He's going to restore her. He says, you're no longer going to call me my husband, or that in that day you'll call me my husband. You'll no longer call me my master. Where is that? Revelation 12, where the woman flees to the wilderness. God protects her for 1,260 days. And then he's going to come back in 3 days before the end of the tribulation, according to the end of Hosea 5 and the beginning of Hosea 6. What happens is they turn and they say, oh my gosh, it's true. Yeshua was the Messiah. And they pray for God to return, and on the third day he returns. 3 days before the end of the tribulation. It's a beautiful love story. So it's God the Father with his divorced wife, Israel, who he's going to restore, because that's what God is all about. Second relationship is his son, God the Son, and he has a virgin Gentile bride. And John 14:2-3, he says, I'm going to go away, prepare a place for you. My father's house is many mansions, and I'm going to come and receive you unto myself. That's a marriage thing, okay? And so God the Son is going to come before here's the tribulation period, 7 years. He's going to come before that, and he's going to get his bride. Take her out. That's us. And then at the end of the tribulation period, when God returns, the Father is going to reunite with his divorced wife. Now, there's a third relationship, and this is the one I'm tracing. It's Satan, the pretender, the adversary. Satan means adversary, okay? And oftentimes, Satan is not his name. In the Hebrew, he's called Hasatan. Satan. Ha just means the adversary. It's just like saying, hey, I'm up here with the Tom, Hatam. Well, I wouldn't call him that. I wouldn't put the before his name. You don't put the before a name, okay? And so adversary, and some people think that God just wiped his name from the scriptures, okay? Even Lucifer is a description of him, not his name, all right? So now you have those three relationships, and his is with his consort, I got to be careful of this kid, his whorish companion, okay? And it's a very bad relationship, obviously. And I want to trace that a little bit. How am I doing on time?
We're 20 minutes in.
Okay. Oh, I said I'd take 20 minutes. Okay, I'm going to speed it up.
Yes.
Okay, I call this the broad way. Because it's the wide way, it's also broad as in a woman, which is a bad term from her. I know, but hang on. It's not referring to women in general. It's referring to this consort of Satan, the broad way, get it? In fact, I didn't realize I did that, and I was laughing at, me and Tom were laughing about that. I didn't even know I did that. So we start with Semiramis. Who's the first world dictator? It was Nimrod. It means rebellion. In Genesis 10, he started a kingdom. Guess where? Yes, Babylon, Babel. He starts it. He was the world ruler. Now, as we go extra biblical, his wife's name was Semiramis. Okay? And there's all kinds of things about Tammuz and all that. But I think that lady first shows up there. Okay? Then we get down to Ahab's wife. And I'm not going to trace every step of the way. Ahab, the worst king in Israel. And who did he marry? Jezebel. Okay? Jezebel. And she was into Baal worship. Then later on in Jeremiah, it talks about this. She takes a different incarnation. You're going to see it's the same woman. She's just switching identities. And that's what Satan does. Okay? Just switching identities. And it says, the children gather wood and the fathers kindle the fire and the women knead dough to make cakes for the queen of heaven. That's what she's called. Okay? And in Sumer, Iana was the queen of heaven in the 3rd millennial BC. In Akkad, in the north, she was worshipped as Ashtar, which is where we get Easter and all that stuff. So that's kind of the connection there. Yeah, a lot of pagan stuff gets into our traditions. A lot of pagan stuff gets into our 666, which shouldn't be surprising, okay? Now you have the queen of heaven being worshipped. And here's what happened. Constantine in 312 AD, he became the Roman emperor. There was a battle at the Melvinian Bridge. He won it. He supposedly saw a vision up in the sky that said, "In this sign conquer." It was a cross. Okay, it was a cross with the little loop on the end of it or whatever, which is a pagan symbol. But anyways, he saw that cross. He won the bridge, and he made the empire Christian. All right. Now at that point, he had the Babylon mystery religions there, okay? And he said, well, priesthood, you guys got to leave unless you become Christians. Oh, we'll become Christians? Well, then you got to be baptized. To them, that was same thing as becoming a Christian was to be baptized. So they got baptized, and all they did was mask their Babylon mystery religion in Christian terms. So what did Mary become? The Queen of Heaven, exactly. Now, that's where I kind of told Tom I'm gonna, I'm just gonna go for it on that. And then that's why she's the woman in 13:33, Matthew 13:30. She's the woman corrupting the thing. She's the one who's bringing in the Babylonian mystery religions into the loaf. Okay? Now, she takes a ride. In Zechariah 5:5 through 5:11, I'm not going to read it, I'm just going to describe it. There's this weird vision that Zechariah has where he sees a woman in a basket. Okay? And then I'm going to make a prediction, not a prophecy, a prediction. And the woman is in that basket, and the angel tells him, this is wickedness. And then there's a metal lid put over that basket, and two women with wings of a stork, which are unclean birds, takes the basket, and it takes it to the land of Shinar, which is Babylon. That's where Babylon is. And she's going to be set there on her pedestal, on her base. All right? And that is talking about the pagan goddess, and her headquarters are going to be Babylon. I take the Bible literally, and I'm going to predict this, and people are shocked when they hear this, but think about it. I'm predicting that the Vatican will move their headquarters from Rome to Babylon. You might say, Babylon, that's not even, no, they're building it up, and we talked about that, Tom. There's a lot of stuff happening there. And so it's going to return back to Babylon, just like Zechariah saw in his vision. Now, I'm gonna show you one more connection and where she ends up and what happens to her, and then I'll be done with this. And it's this, the shamash. Okay? In a menorah, you have, it's really a single candlestick with three on each side. And if you look at it, it's the tree of life. And so that middle candlestick is the fourth one. If you have a series of 7 in the Bible, the fourth one's always the key one to look at. It somehow represents Jesus in a very good way or a very bad way. It's the key thing in a series of 7. So you'll learn to, series of 7, man, better look at that fourth one, see how, what it's doing there. Well, what is the fourth parable of 7 parables in Matthew 13? The woman and the leaven. Wow. Okay. What is the fourth church that Jesus writes to in Revelation 2 and 3? Thyatira. Okay. Now, in that, just so you know, the 7 churches are prophetic. Each one, and I do have a handout. I doubt if we get to print it. I'll send it to Tom. You guys can ask him for it later. I will map out all 7 churches in the 7 church ages. And the last 4 are concurrent. Thyatira is the last form. It means continual sacrifice. It's a reference to their mass. Okay? And in it, get this, the fourth church, fourth parable, there's a woman putting leaven in. The fourth church has a woman in the church that she's causing God's saints to stumble by her immorality. And guess what her name is? Jezebel. Get it? Now, so she's in the church age, she's corrupting that, which corresponds to 13:33 in Matthew. Then you follow her to her final destination, and because it's that fourth one, you go to Revelation 17 and 18. John saw a woman riding the beast. The beast represents a few things. It's the Antichrist himself, and it's his government. The woman is a religious system. It says he was amazed. Now, women are oftentimes religious systems, false religious systems in the Bible, okay? And he was amazed because it was a copy of Christianity. It was she was drunk on the blood of martyrs. And there's only one way that through the church age that Mystery Babylon has come down through the ages. It's through the Roman Catholic Church. And there's one institution that is drunk on the blood of the martyrs. The Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so that's just, that's just the truth, and I can't say it any other way, but we need to be aware of this. Okay, so she ends up in that, and here's what, and it's funny. If you go to Revelation 2:18 through 23, and the 22, he says this about Jezebel, the church. Indeed, I will cast her into a sick bed, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation. He tells them explicitly they will be in the tribulation period, great tribulation. which Jesus referred to as the second half of tribulation in Matthew 24. So it's all there. If you know how to read it and you know how to understand it, it's there. Now, here's where I conclude, and it's this. That's a lot of heavy-duty stuff, and the spirit of this age, I'm going to tell you what it is, because I was doing a lot of praying, as you might imagine, over the last couple of years, and I knew something was happening that went beyond the natural. You can't, say, well, it's because you didn't do this or send enough flowers or something. No, it was freaky. It was supernatural. And there's a spirit, because you guys see it, don't you? Think people going crazy. And you realize one thing, truth, logic, and reason have nothing to do with it. You can bring that in all you want. It means nothing, because there's a spirit in this age. And it says in 2 Corinthians 2:11, he says, lest Satan take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his schemes. Unfortunately, I think a lot of Christians are ignorant of his schemes. So we need to understand that. Okay, here's the key verse. It says this, Ephesians 2. He says, you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now working among the sons of disobedience. There's a spirit today that's very heavy. It is the spirit of Jezebel. Okay? What's the spirit of Jezebel? Rebellion. Okay? There's no rhyme or reason. Just turn on your TV on the news. Total rebellion. And what does he say in Samuel? Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. That's Jezebel. Okay? That is Jezebel. And that's what we have. And Jezebel means Baal exalts or unchaste. Okay? Now, here's our strategy. Okay? Is not to be ignorant of his schemes. And here's Satan's main tactic. I quoted this so many times in this Job 2:4. This is Satan's tactic, and you're all going to have to face it. When Satan was before Job, he said, skin for skin, all that a man has, he'll give for his life. It's fear, right? It's fear. If you walk in fear, that's Satan's tool, it's fear. He keeps you in line with fear. And then he uses you, then he slits your throat. And, that's where the beast turns on the whore and tramples her and kills her. That's what he does. That's his method. Use you for what he can, slice your throat open, and throw you overboard, which is obviously the exact opposite of God. So that's his tactic, is fear. Here's our tactic. Very simple. It was that slide, or that picture I had this morning. Remember, passion never fails? Deuteronomy 6:5. And first and greatest commandment, Jesus repeated it in different places in the gospel. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. Remember, that word is meod for strength, which means everything in you. And if you go 90, and that's been my lifetime goal. I had that at the beginning of my life put in front of me when I became a Christian, and you have to strive for it, because our hearts are fragmented. Our hearts are in other places. We worry about the game. We worry about this or that. We worry about, making enough money. And our hearts are fragmented. We don't give a whole heart to God, which is a shame, because he deserves it. And so I have been pursuing that for 41 years. And it's the best pursuit I've ever been on, okay? Because he'll come alongside of you, and he will help you on that. But if you keep that, and just remember this, last scripture, and then we will go into whatever is this. Habakkuk 3:17 through 19. And this is the times we're in. And this is going to be our attitude. He says this, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flocks may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on my high hills. That is our outlook. Okay, God will protect us. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through bad times. And he may protect us by taking us home. I'm all for that. And I'm always telling Tom, and he's saying to me, well, if they're going to come and get us, then let them come and get us for a reason. Not that we're hiding. You know what I'm saying? I want to be shouting on the housetops when they come and get me. That's fine. There's no fear. It's like I said this morning, you got to be a dead man walking and just say, I'm going to go all out. And it's in God's hands. It's just like the two witnesses. They get to prophesy for 1,260 days. And the whole world's against them. They hate them. There's nothing that they can do. But guess what? When God says it's time for you to come home, their ministry's over. But for the 1,260 days, Satan can't do a thing. Antichrist can't do a thing. Okay? So your life is in the hands of God. All right? So that was my message. But go on, Tom. You are next.
All right. Well, just what I want to do, we're going to take some questions. If you guys want to maybe just send your questions up to the front or pass them to Jason, he'll bring them up. But as we're getting those together, Ed, you and I have a lot of phone conversations that sometimes maybe twice a week, and sometimes those conversations go 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, they do.
And the thing that when we talk, a lot of times you'll bring up some things and you'll use some words with me that maybe I have to look up, or I might know, but maybe are not really common words in use. So let me ask you what some of these words mean.
Okay.
Okay. Sometimes when we're talking about this, the feast, you talk about the Shemitah. What is the Shemitah?
The Shemitah. I think it's Deuteronomy 15:1. Just like we have 7 days in a week, and the seventh day is Sabbath, right? You have the Shemitah cycle. You have 6 years that Israel worked. The 7th year was their sabbatical year. And he calls it in Deuteronomy 15:1. I believe that's the right scripture. I didn't look it up. But he says it's a year of release. In other words, debts are forgiven, slaves are set free, okay? And that Hebrew word is Shemitah. So technically, Shemitah would only refer to the 7th year. If you say Shemitah cycle, it refers to all 7 years. Now, when you put up that together in Leviticus, something called the year of Yovel, the year of Jubilee. Sounds like the jubilant year, right? It's not. Yovel means ram's horn. You might say, I thought that was shofar. No, shofar is the trumpet you make from the ram's horn. Very key to this whole conversation of Jesus, because he will return for the second coming in the year of Jubilee. And there's specific reasons why, and Luke, I'm going to go over it. In Luke 4, he came to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, which was a Jubilee passage. And because he has to offer the kingdom in a Jubilee, in a year of Yovel, he has to offer it on that year. When did he make the offering? Well, for anywhere from 30 to 32 AD, when he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, Zechariah 9:9 fulfilled prophecy. That's when he offered officially, and it had to be a year of Jubilee, which is why I maintain when he comes back for the second coming and sets up his kingdom, it's got to be a year of Jubilee. That's when he's going to set up his kingdom. So the first offer was in the year of Jubilee, and the second time when he comes, when the Jews have already accepted him, according to Hosea, it will be a year of Jubilee. So they will blow the shofar, the ram's horn, at that time. Okay?
Okay, when we talk about like interpretation from a Hebrew point of view, there's a couple of words you will use, and maybe you can tell us what these mean. Peshat.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Peshat. You know, we went through, and God took me on a real course, and if you just put down PRDS, okay, and then you have to put some consonants there, so it's PARDES, okay? And the consonants, vowels. They don't have vowels in Hebrew. It's Pardes, which is an acronym for garden, okay? And that first word that Tom's mentioned, Peshat. And people get all kind of, oh, that's the Jewish way of doing it. Actually, we have our Gentile counterparts to every one of them. The first one, Peshat, is what we would call the historical grammatical method. The literal method. When I say literal, when Jesus said he was the door, we didn't mean he had hinges and he was made out of wood and all that. That's stupid. What we mean is, in the historical context, he was a rabbi. He means he was the opening. He was the way into something else. Get it? So if you understand, that is the literal method. That's the Peshat, okay? And you want me to go through all this, or do you want to?
Well, I was going to ask Remnes, but just go through it.
Okay, Remnes is the next one. We would call that a hint at something deeper. A hint at something deeper. Abraham sends his son, or sends his servant, Eleazar, which we get from several chapters earlier, unnamed servant, to go into a foreign land to get a Gentile bride for his son. Oh, wait a minute. God the Father sent an unnamed servant, the Holy Spirit, into a foreign land to get a Gentile bride. And when Eleazar, which means God the Helper, gets the bride, he woos her with gifts. Oh gosh, we get spiritual gifts. It's a hint. We call it typology. Remember I said, like in Matthew 13:1, at that key pivotal moment, what did he do? He left, he went out of the house, and then he was by the sea. What's the house? He went out of the house of Israel, and he was by the sea, the Gentiles. Clues, Remnes. The next one is Darash, which that's your homily, your Sunday morning sermon, the application and stuff. And the last one is Sod, S-O-D. That's mystery, mysteries. And that's when Paul says, behold, 1 Corinthians 15:51, behold, I tell you a mystery, a mysterion. Okay, and he reveals mysteries. Paul 11:25, I tell you a mystery, a partial hardening so there's mysteries that are revealed. Okay, and that's why Revelation 17 is so important, because we're just about to go into that. Like, how did that mystery Babylon come down through the ages? So it's those things as partis. And actually, with my Tuesday evening group, we spent, I think, 6 months just on hermeneutics. Okay, because so important. I had to give a more Jewish point of view. And the things that the Jews come up with in the rabbinical writings, like for instance, I'll give you just one, and I'll let you go on. It is, like for instance, the Feast of Trumpets, which I would maintain is the rapture. They call it the wedding day for the Messiah. Where did they get that? What is it? It's the wedding day for the Messiah. We know that for a fact as Christians, but the Jews know that. You see what I'm saying? In their writings and in their culture, they come up with all this stuff. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But go on. Did I cover it all, I think? Yeah, so,
yep.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, you remember back in the late 80s and way back then, you and I even talked about this. There was a book written called 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming in 1988.
Yes.
And then when that didn't happen in 1989, there was a book, he had another book, 89 Reasons
Yes.
Why He's Coming in 1989. So the question is, in regard to that, is it
Okay.
dangerous to try to set a time for the rapture?
Okay. I actually still have that book, I think, in my bookcase somewhere at home. I kept it. Seriously. When I hear people like, what's that Family Life Radio, and there was that one guy, Harold Camping, and it's like, you remember it was back in like 2005, and I thought, okay, he says he's going to come back this year. They are the stupidest reasons, okay? God works in patterns, all right? He works in cycles, all right? And this, I would say, is the 1 Corinthians code when he goes through all the feasts in order. And we see that the first feast, Passover, according to Paul in Corinthians, he should know, was fulfilled by Jesus. The first feast was the first one fulfilled. And guess what day it was fulfilled on? Passover. Wow. The next feast up was the next feast Jesus fulfilled. It was unleavened bread. It was 3 days that year before first fruits. And he fulfilled that when? When he was 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Wow. The third feast was the third one fulfilled, and it was on that day, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:20. He says, Christ, the first fruits, is risen from the dead. Guess what day Christ was risen that year? First fruits. And then we know Pentecost was fulfilled on Pentecost, okay? And it's actually in there in Corinthians, but it's in a mystical way because it's the mystical body of Christ. Then he comes to something about the last trumpet. Now, I'm going to tell you what the last trumpet is.
Because you're going to answer another question.
Okay. Should I do that now? Tell them what the last trumpet is?
Well, go ahead and continue and then come back to the last trumpet.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
go ahead.
Okay, so then he comes, that the rapture is going to happen at the last trumpet in 1 Corinthians 15, 51, and 52. All right? That last trumpet is a technical term. They do it today, they did it then. They blow 99 trumpets. There's 3 kind of blasts, and they blow them responsively for 99 times. In that 100th blast, the very last trumpet, one long trumpet, it's the very last trumpet. You know what they call that? The last trumpet. No, I'm not kidding you. They call it the last trumpet. When I first read that years ago, it's like, you got to be kidding me. That's what it is. And so Paul, if you line up the feast all fulfilled in order and on the day, and you get to the last trumpet, what he is saying, because he would have celebrated the feast, he was there for a year and a half. He would have gone through the feast. In other words, when he talked about Passover, Christ, our Passover, it has been, sacrificed, he didn't explain Passover. Why? They knew what it was. He celebrated it with them. I think every Christian should do Passover. So the last trumpet is that. And so he says, if you understand the text, but we don't, we're Gentiles in the 21st century Western culture. And so we make it the 7th trumpet or Matthew 24. And I know what that Matthew 24 trumpet is. You know what it is? It's the shofar that brings in the year of Yovel, the year of Jubilee. That's the trumpet he returns to. Okay? I mean, it all just meshes together. So that last trumpet is that. Now, is there danger in that? I would be the first to tell you, I don't know the cycles. And in fact, the Jewish rabbis themselves say that the year of Jubilee has been lost. If God puts these cycles and these things in there, they're for us. It says God does nothing. In Amos 3:8, that just comes to my mind. I don't know if it's there. He says, God does nothing except that which he reveals to his servants, the prophets. Wait a minute. Is the rapture something? Is something fairly big? Did he reveal it through his servants, the prophets? You see what I'm saying? Maybe he did. And I see all these cycles and stuff going on, like the Shemitah and the year of Jubilee. And all this is adding up. So, and Paul says, like I say explicitly, that the rapture will happen then. And there's people who get nervous about no man knows the day or the hour. Am I getting too far ahead, or is that a question?
No, go ahead. That's not
Okay.
a question. Go ahead.
Okay. And me and Tom had talked about this. I knew, 30 years ago, when I just read it in context, no man knows the day or the hour. Everybody, the pat answer is
That's Matthew 24.
Yeah, Matthew 24 and Mark 13.
Yep.
Okay, read it in context. And remember a couple things. Number one, was he here to offer the church, Jesus? No, he's here to offer the Messianic kingdom. The church was not even on the table, much less the rapture. Okay? So, and he revealed the rapture as a mysterion, a mystery, in 1 Corinthians 15:51. Behold, I tell you a mystery. All right? So I maintain that when he says no man knows the day or the hour, guess what? He was talking about the second coming. And just put it in context. In fact, I thought I was going to spend one Tuesday evening class on that. I spent a month and a half on it. I said, okay, guys, if we don't get past this, you're not going to get it. And we did. By the time I was done, all the arguments like, well, once the tribulation begins, we know exactly the number of days, so don't we know exactly when he returns? Stuff like that. That's easily answered. That's adding a condition that was not there at the time. That's like me saying, you know what, I'll tell you when the rapture is on the way up. Well, of course I can. And I'm going to mess you up even more. Of the 7 feasts, there's one feast that they say no man knows the day or the hour. It's the Feast of Trumpets, the rapture. But wait a minute, you said that no man knows the day or that. No, it wasn't. It was a remnant. In other words, Jesus said, no man knows the day or the hour, which is the second return at that time. And then he gives a remnant. Oh, by the way, there is another coming that I'm going to come for my people. Not just the second coming. See what I'm saying? It was a hint, a clue of another coming. So I know it gets kind of complex, and I try to build thing upon thing, and I confuse everybody. But that's what it was. And you know why no one knows the day or the hour? Because it was the beginning of the month, and once the calendar switched from 365 to 365 and a quarter days, you had to wait until there was an exact new moon, and they weren't sure. So that's why today they have a 2-day feast, because they're not exact, Because back then they had to say, okay, what if we miss it that first day? Well, let's go ahead and celebrate that day and the next day, because we know we could hit it in 2 days. So it became known as, and when he said no man knows of the day or the hour, if you were a Jew listening, you would have thought, oh my gosh, Feast of Trumpets. You didn't know what it meant as far as, him coming back. And you would have thought another thing. That was the marriage ceremony. John 14, verses 2 and 3. He's going to go and prepare a place and come back and get us. The way that some people explain it away, like people I respect, and they see the pattern of the feast, you say, well, how can you miss it? They don't. And they say, oh yeah, the rapture is the fulfillment of the Feast of Trumpets, but it doesn't have to happen on the Feast of Trumpets.
But
I know, that's what they say.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. So you tell me the first 4 feasts, it happened exactly on the day in the order, and then you get all of a sudden to this 5th feast, oh, it doesn't have to happen because it's that mantra, no man knows the day or the hour. Oh, and by the way, what I did was I took the Day of Atonement, which is the tribulation period, and I started mapping things out. Mind-blowing. Everything lined up, every event that you could trace a date landed on a feast. It was ridiculous.
Next question. Just in light of like the Roman Church, as we were talking about that, how would the early church interpret these things before the Roman Catholic Church?
Oh, the early church?
Yeah.
Well, what happened was, like I say, the Epistle of Barnabas, they just took things literally, and they just saw that pattern, because God works in patterns. God, the church is going to last 2,000 years, because that's 6,000 years, and he's going to return for a 1,000-year reign. Later on, there was, around the year 200, there was a split between the church and the Jewish way of thought, which was so sad. Then we went to an Eastern Greek thought, our Western Greek thought, and left the Eastern Hebraic thought. And that's a whole thing in and of itself. And then we started taking things more allegorical. And what happened was, I think it was Augustine, because it was under the Roman Empire, and he's supposed to be one of the great theologians for both Protestants and the Roman Catholics, he started explaining, and it was actually before him too, he started explaining things away by allegory. Well, it doesn't really mean that. It says that, but you know what I'm saying? And then they started getting off course a lot. Now, that I don't know if that's what, I probably went a different direction, but when I stand before God, I want to say this. When I read your word, I believe that you meant what you said and said what you meant. I want to go on that basis. And so, like, and I'm really getting off, but some people like the Reform movement, they will say this, they're preterists, and they'll say, I'll say, what does this verse mean right here that he can be born in Bethlehem? Oh, he was born in Bethlehem. Was it saying Isaiah, 7:14, that he's going to be born of a virgin? What could that possibly mean? Oh, he was born of a virgin. Oh, okay. What does it mean right here when it says he's going to set up a 1,000-year kingdom? Well, that doesn't mean that. So everything about his first coming is literal, because they can't deny it. Then all of a sudden you get to the second coming, and it doesn't mean what it says.
Okay, here we go. When talking to believers who believe in mid-trib or post-trib rapture, what is your best argument for pre-tribulation rapture?
Oh, very easy. Just turn to Leviticus 23, and then they get this stunned look, and then I don't have to say anything else. Leviticus 23, and that really is my answer nowadays. I used to come with fancy or this or that, or God's going to, and one of the mistakes, well, if you want something a little more, because they're not going to go through, hours and hours of study. They always come back to me and say, well, I didn't see the rapture in there. Of course you didn't. It takes a lot of study, and you have to dig that out. But let me give you a little clue here. What it says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, I think chapter 4 or 5, talks about we're not destined for wrath, okay? And then he says that God would deliver us from the wrath to come. And then you have the 7 bowls of God's wrath, right? And so, yeah, we're going to be in the tribulation, but we're going to be delivered before then. There's a simple thing that even people who study a lot and even written books that I've talked to didn't know this very simple thing. The thing that we are delivered from and not destined for is God's arge, O-R-G-E. And it's the 7 bowls of God's thumos, T-H-U-M-O-S. It completely just destroys so many arguments, just right there, because they didn't look at the Greek. It's amazing to me that people miss that. But, you know. So that's my answer.
Okay.
Leviticus 23. Just send them there.
And a New Testament one, if you want it, is Revelation chapter 4. And what you find there is at the beginning of the tribulation, when you look at where they are on earth or in heaven, it moves to in heaven, and you find the church in heaven. So that to me is a good New Testament.
Yeah. 'Cause was it 170? He says, write the things that were, the things that are, and the things that will be after this. It's metatauta, after this. And the next time that word shows up is after he writes the letters in Revelation 2 and 3 to the churches. This is metatauta. After this, I saw a door, open up in heaven, and someone say, come up here. And John was raptured up to heaven. Again, it's typology. I got that. And then next thing you know, the church is in heaven, then you come back down the tribulation period. And you never hear the word church again during the tribulation period. Clues that we're not tuned into, I think, so.
Okay, I love these questions. We got some great questions here. And I mean that. These are really good questions. Can a Gentile be saved in the tribulation?
Absolutely. Revelation 7, you see that that John saw a great multitude in heaven, okay? And he asked the angel, who are these? Which is kind of interesting because he didn't recognize them as the church. Who are these? And the angels answered, these are ones that come out of great tribulation and wash their robes white in the blood of the Lamb. So yeah, I think I forget who I was talking to. The last days does not teach us as far as the church a revival, except in a very certain way, which I won't get into. It teaches us apostasy, a falling away, not a revival. But I think the revival comes in the tribulation period. Because then there is no wheat and tares. There's only wheat. You don't make a commitment that, hey, I can't buy or sell here. I have to give my life. That's kind of a firm commitment when you make that. You know what I'm saying? You're not, and I'm really not joking. The tares don't show up in that scenario at all. So, yeah, I think that, Gentiles would be saved. And of course, in 2 Thessalonians 2, I'll mention one caveat. It talks about how the Antichrist is going to walk into the very temple of God. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the great apostasy has to come before the man of sin and the son of perdition. And I think that's the first half, he's the man of sin, and the second half, he's the son of perdition, but I don't want to get sidetracked on that. But it says he walks in the very temple of God, proclaiming himself as being God, which Matthew warns about in Matthew 24:15, when you see the abomination of desolation, okay, which involves more than just him in the temple proclaiming to be God. But you go down a few verses and it talks about they will be given over to believe the lie, okay, the lie. And I hear a lot of astute people say, well, that must be evolution or this or that. No, just take it in context. The lie is they're going to be given over to believe that the Antichrist is God. And what is the first lie in the garden? You shall be as gods. What's the New Age lie? You shall be you see Satan permeating that lie. Finally, his man's going to come. And the big lie that people will be given over to that deception is that the Antichrist is literally God. Now, all that to say that some people think that people who plainly and clearly heard the truth before the tribulation period will be given that deception because they rejected the love of the truth. And so you can't get saved if you rejected the gospel now and you go into the tribulation period. That's one theory. And you've heard that one. So I'm just bringing that out. Not that I necessarily believe it, but I don't know.
Okay, and this question's related. Revelation 5:9, you alluded to it. And they sang a new song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. And I got to quote verse 10 with this.
Okay.
And have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth. Does this refer to the church believers or tribulation believers?
Okay. Just off the top of my head, I would say that's the church, okay? And I believe that seven sealed, because they're kings and priests, and that's what Peter calls us. And you know where we're going to reign? Everybody says, well, are you going to go to heaven? Actually, we're only up there for the marriage feast of the Lamb. Our destination is to come down here with him. We're going to rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. Then comes the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and the earth, and then there's ages untold after that. We don't have everything in there, okay? But it's not going to be boring, I know that. And so the seven sealed, I thought you were going to go, what's that seven sealed book? I think it's two things. Number one, I think it's and they found archaeological evidence that title deeds were sealed with seven seals. So what's happening? We have a usurper on the throne. Just like when King David was anointed king, but he couldn't reign for a certain amount of time. There was a usurper, Saul, on the throne. And it's kind of interesting. If you take Saul's name, and there's no consonants in the original Hebrew, it could be Sheol, the grave or hell. His name could be. So he's a type of Satan. So there's a usurper that has to be removed. Okay? Now, so it's a title deed to the earth. What's happening here? Joshua. The book of Joshua is the book of Yeshua, or the book of Jesus. That's what that word Joshua comes from. And it's Joshua conquering the land in 7 years, in a 7-year campaign, dispelling 7 nations. And that's exactly what happens during the tribulation period. So it's a title deed to the land. It's a title deed to the earth, because who's the God of this world? 2 Corinthians 4:4. The God of this world has blinded the mind of the non-believer. I always ask people, it's funny, ask Christians, who's the God of this world? 99% of the time they'll say, our Heavenly Father. No, it's not. It's Satan. He's in control. And also the other thing that the seven sealed book is that I've read, and get that this works too. So I think there's levels of meaning, is a marriage license. We're up there with Jesus. It's the marriage license. So it works different ways, in my opinion.
What will happen to the countries that aren't mentioned in the end time prophecies? So I guess that kind of includes the U.S. because we're not mentioned by name.
Well, actually they are.
Okay.
Because, where is it? Zechariah 12:14, it says, all the nations of the world will come against Israel. So they are in that sense.
Yep.
So there's nobody going to support Israel by that time, because Christians are gone, and we're the big support for Israel. And all this stuff coming, they're going to be anti-Semitism like crazy. And they're all going to come against Israel. And God's going to smoke them at that time. So that's my answer. Okay?
How does the number system, number value of specific words or Bible passages work? Where did it come from? Is it mentioned in the Bible?
Okay, it's verified. Gosh, I wish I had my notes. It's verifiably in the Bible. It's not something we came up with. For instance, just even the mark of the beast in 13:18, Revelation 13:18. He says, it's the number of a name, and that name is 666. In other words, it adds up to 666. Actually, boy, I don't want to go off on the mark of the beast now. Maybe I will. Just remind me. Just write a question or say, can Ed go off on the mark of the beast? Okay, and then that'll give me excuse. But it's there, and there's another time in the book of Jeremiah where that happens too. I don't have the specific reference, but it's the Jews. That's the way they thought and they think. They break down the letters and numbers, and the rabbis say, when Jesus comes, or the Messiah, they say the Messiah comes, he'll not only explain the words and the letters and all that, but he'll explain the spaces in between the letters. And when you get into it, it is freaky. It is freaky. Can I give one Bible code? Is it?
Sure.
Okay, and I'll give you an example, because this is talking about when I was going through the feast, the Moed. That is appointed time. Moedim, okay, Moedim is appointed times. Ha-Moedim is the appointed times, okay? So, the equal letter distancing where they come up with, you skip every 50 letters and then you go the next 50 letters and then it spells something. Well, it says this, because God said, and this is Genesis 1:14, that God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for years, for days and for years. He's given us that up there for signs. Now, a lot of people say, well, isn't that astrology? No, there's a Mizrath, which originally the stars, I believe, told the gospel story. Again, I'm not talking astrology and all that, okay? I'm talking what it originally said, because he says that right there. Now, if you look at ha-moedim, that phrase, and you go to a 50-letter skip, it should show up, like I forget, 17 times in the book of Genesis. It shows up only once. It's like 1 in a 70 million hit that only shows up once. And ha-moedim means the appointed times, the feast. And guess what? The middle of that very phrase is Genesis 1:14, where he says he puts the sun, the moon, and the stars up there in the sky. These things cannot be coincidences. And how do they destroy your faith? You know, how are those things bad? You know? And so, like with the 666, man, I played with that one. You know, that was, boy, but I won't get into it unless someone asks that question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
So, well, and just on that, also on that question, it's like if you, and you can find this on the internet as far as like the Hebrew alphabet. If you look up the Hebrew alphabet, it will tell you that each of those letters have a numeric value. And so it can actually have a count. I mean, if you think about it, what are Roman numerals? We read them as numbers, but they're letters, right? Okay? Mm-hmm. And same with Arabic numerals. Okay, so language typically also carries with it the alphabets, the letters, a numerical value. So this is where some of this comes up. Another question: is the Leviathan still alive?
You know, and you guys know what the Leviathan is and all that. And then we have our commentators that, well, it's a hippopotamus or something. I'm serious. It's like he has a, tail like a tree trunk and all that. Here's my theory is a representation of it. It really is an animal. And I'm not so sure that the beast in Revelation 13 that comes out of the sea, I'm not so sure that's not the Leviathan. Okay? It's almost a representation, a personification of Satan, which is what the beast is. So, I mean, just something to think about. It's funny, my sons love the Leviathan. They talk about it and they wrote a little booklet on it and all that, so it's something near and dear to my heart. But it obviously is an awesome creature. And will he reappear in the end times? Yeah, I think so. I think so. And, with this Genesis 1:14, I'll put something in there real quick. You guys know about the Revelation 12 sign in 2017? Who's heard of that? Okay, just a few, okay? That was, get this, there was an alignment of the stars. John said he saw a great sign in heaven, which is the same thing in Genesis 14. He says he puts them up for signs. And he says he puts the stars up there for signs and for seasons. He doesn't mean, I should have put this in my other talk, he doesn't mean spring, summer, winter, and fall. It's Moedim, for appointed times, for seasons. He means seasons of times. Remember the feasts are called Moedim? And so that word is Moedim right there. And so in 2017, this weird thing happened. And my friends were sending me videos, look at this! And it was up in the sky, Virgo. Remember it originally told the gospel story? She had 12 stars around her head at a certain time. And she had the moon at her feet, and she was clothed in the sun. And Jupiter, get this, the king planet, came across her, went into her womb, then stayed there for about 8 months, same period that a woman's pregnant. Then it exited her down beneath her, on her legs. And it was that close to doing it on the Feast of Trumpets. Wow. In fact, I even called my friend Brad Plowman, who won't be watching this, but I said, you know what, Brad, I don't think this is going to be the rapture. Here's why. It occurred like 2 or 3 days after or before the rapture. It wasn't right on the Feast of Trumpets. And I said, as far as I can tell, what God is telling us is it's near. It's close. If it would have been on the Feast of Trumpets, man, I would have, lost my mind. Seriously. But God, he says, Genesis 1:14, that he gives us those signals for us. He's telling us stuff. But my question is, are we listening? Right? I don't think we're listening very good. And you might say, well, he's speaking to us in that strange language. Well, you know what? I say turn off the TV for a few evenings and study and look into it, really, seriously. And there's a lot of good resources out there, okay? But anyway, go ahead.
So, just quick question. How many of you guys were not here when we went through the book of Daniel the last time? How many were not? Okay, just a couple of you guys. Well, in case you've forgotten, one of the things that I had talked about in that was, how Daniel became chief over the Magi. 600 years later, here come the Magi because they saw a sign in heaven that told them that the Messiah was born. And so these are some of the things. And I think what you had, and the reason the Magi were missing things is they were missing the critical component, and that was they were missing God. They did not have God. They did not have the Scriptures. And so when Daniel became chief over them, I think that's probably changed the order of the Magi for that time. And so what became a pseudoscience became a science. And I think he had brought something back that we have since lost, because most of the time we don't even consider anything of that nature.
Well, if you actually had questioned Daniel, one of the scoffers, and said, well, what happened on that day? Oh, a baby was born. That's it? You see what I'm saying? There's no hard empirical evidence. I don't know what happened on 2017, but it's kind of weird. Some people say that sign only appeared 3 other times. Creation, when Jesus was born, and then 2017. That particular alignment, which I find interesting, And here's what happens. People are lining up. Realize this. It says in 2 Peter chapter 3, I think verse 2 or 3, he says this, that scoffers will come. These are scoffers who come in the last days. And here's what I find is I find it more in the walls of the church than I do find it in the world. They'll come in the last days. Now here's the key phrase, following after their own lust. And they're going to say, where's the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers have fallen asleep, all things have continued just as they have. And what's the reason? Why are they not excited about Jesus coming back? Why are they not, getting the Bible? Why are they saying you're unspiritual? Why are they saying that's dangerous? Because it doesn't fit into their little plan. They're following after their own lust. They're looking for that retirement. They're looking for that, second car. They're looking for the latest movie. They're looking for following the football team or whatever. Their whole heart is not towards God. It's an interruption. Seriously, it's an interruption in their life that Jesus might come back. That's what I'm living for. That's what I'm living for.
All right, last 2 questions, and then we'll wind it up. Since Israel became a nation, as referenced in Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 35, the parable of the fig tree, it says that this generation that sees all these things take place, know that the end is near at the door, and this generation will not pass away. How long is a generation?
How long is used to be they said 40 years because in the wilderness and the wanderings and all that, it was 40 years that they were there because the other generation had to pass away. Then they said, no, maybe it's 70. And maybe it is 70 because what King David in the Psalm said something about 70 years, And then if you go by what they say in Exodus, they were there for 4 generations, and you see they were there for 400 years. So it's not real clear and plain.
So, last question. Referring to the word deceived in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, what top 5 deceptions do you believe will occur during that time?
Well, the top one, according to 2 Thessalonians, will be the Antichrist is God. That is the delusion, the lie. It's like pseudo something. I forget the Greek word. Pseudo something, where it's a fake, an imitation. And then what other ones will come? I can't even think off the top of my head. There's going to be so much delusion that is going to come. And it's going to be, we have it today. We have a precursor. Layer upon layer upon layer of deception. And you find it hard just to get through things. Because once you dig through the first layer of deception, there's another one. And then another one. And another one. And that's the way Satan works, okay? And the only way, but I will say this, the only way that you could avoid deception is the Word of God. It's got the truth. You got to spend time with it. You got to learn it. Because he's warned us about all this stuff. As you know, I've talked about. He's warned us about all this. And he's told us what his plan is and what Satan's plan is. But if you don't know it, whose fault is that? Is it God's fault? No, it's our fault. We got to get in there, and we got to get out there and spread the word. And that's why I'm here in Sioux Falls, is what God gave me. I know he didn't just say, okay, Ed, that's just for you. No, it's not. It's for whatever truth I have to say that God's given me, and it's for you guys, along with my Tuesday Bible study or whatever, to get it out there. You know, here's a question. You think Jesus would return and you go to heaven or hell, right? You would think. I'm just using reason. And I always wonder, what, you're going to come here on this earth and set up a 1,000-year reign, and we know the typology, you know, about 1,000 years and all that. But why? Why would he do that? Does anybody have any suggestion? Why was he, there's a specific reason, why would he come and set up his kingdom here on this earth? And that's the covenants. You got the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12, 1 through 3, so keen from that come 3 other covenants. The new covenant, you know, Jeremiah 31, 31 and following. Okay, the
Palestinian covenant?
Palestinian, which is in Deuteronomy, which deals with the land. Then you got basically the Davidic covenant, which is like 2 Samuel 7, 16 and 18 through something like that. He made promises to Israel, and this is so important. He made promises to Israel that were unconditional, that he will keep. Not that he might. And he's never fulfilled them. He promised them borders and a land, not based upon their obedience. The Mosaic law was something else. That was whether they're going to be in the land or not. He promised they would dwell in a land with certain borders. They never even come close. He said this will happen. He said you will have a king that will sit on the throne, ruling and reigning forever. That's never happened. He said that everybody should know me from the least to the greatest. The new covenant, that has never happened for Israel. And that's why there has to be a millennial kingdom. He's got to fulfill his covenant. And that's why it scares me when people say there's no millennial kingdom, because what they're basically saying, they don't mean to, but what they're basically saying is God is a covenant breaker. God will not keep his word. So that's just the basis of getting a framework around everything. You got to get that down, seriously, because you're going to get confused. Well, you know, it doesn't mean this, and it doesn't mean that, and it could mean this. And I argued with some guy that said, well, we had an argument about that once. And he's like, well, and he somehow, to prove his argument, how many angels can fit on a pinhead? I was like, what does the guy do there? I'm serious. But they start getting outlandish because of it. But God will keep his word, just like he kept his word to me. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the new covenant, which we're saved by, right? This is the blood in the new covenant and all that. That was not made with Gentiles. That was made with Jews. Yep. So how in the world are we saved? Well, nobody asked that question, so I'm not going to answer. Actually, we have a Jewish husband that's going to come for us, okay? To make it short. But understand the covenants, understand God's plan, because he has a plan, and I'll tell you, it'll build you up, and you go through the hard times, it's like, no, God has a plan. Not only in the overall world, but in my life, he has a plan. You see what I'm saying? It will get you so excited about what God's doing. You can look at the devil and what he's doing, and keep up, be informed. But I tell you what excites me is what God is doing, understanding his word. Yeah, I'm safe. I'm absolutely safe.
Well, Ed, thanks for coming and sharing with us. It's been a blessing, and we just look forward to having you back again. And if we're still here, yeah. so you have to come before next September.
Yeah.
And it still might be too late.
Yeah.
All right.
No, thank you for having me, guys.
All right.
Seriously, thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Thanks,
It really
Ed.
has. It's been an honor.
Well, let's pray. Well, Father, we just thank you for this time we could gather together. And Lord, I just pray that by all of this, Lord, that we all would be just more excited for your coming. Lord, we just long to be with you. In Jesus' name, amen. If you guys have any other questions you want to ask Ed, we'll stick around for a bit and you can come up and ask him.